What does it mean to cross a place that seems determined to remain uncrossed? Somewhere between a mountain wall and a river too deep to hear clearly, human beings have always asked the same quiet question. Not whether a bridge would be beautiful, not whether it would be easy, but whether the distance in front of them could be persuaded to yield. Across centuries, that question has taken many forms. A line of woven fibers over an Andean gorge, a span of steel hung above mist. A road lifted so high above the earth that the valley beneath it seems to belong to another world. A bridge is often described as a structure. That is true, but it is not the whole truth. A bridge is also a confession of need. Someone needed to get home before winter. Someone needed to carry food, medicine, memory, trade, or hope from one side of danger to the other. Long before these crossings became photographs, landmarks, or feats of engineering, they were acts of trust. And trust is never simple when the landscape resists. Rock shifts, wind gathers force in narrow valleys, water carves patience into stone for thousands of years and asks no permission. In such places, even the most careful calculations can feel like a conversation with uncertainty. The materials may change from grass rope to tempered glass, from timber to concrete and steel, but the emotion beneath them remains strangely constant: awe, fear, determination. In this journey, we will move through bridges that seem almost unreal, some ancient, some modern, some elegant, some severe. Each one stands where instinct says to turn back. Each one reveals something about the people who imagined it into existence. Because in the end, the most remarkable thing about a bridge is not that it defies gravity. It is that it answers loneliness with connection and silence with a path forward. What if a bridge could frighten you before you ever set foot on it? In western Japan, across the calm waters of Lake Nakaumi, there is a roadway that seems to rise out of the earth with impossible ambition. From a distance, the Eshima Ohashi Bridge does not look like a bridge at all. It looks like a wall, a gray arc of concrete climbing into the sky so abruptly that the cars upon it appear to be testing the limits of gravity. In photographs, it resembles a roller coaster paused at the edge of its first drop, suspended in that thin second before instinct takes over. And yet, the truth is quieter than the image. The slope, while steep, is entirely manageable by engineering standards. The illusion comes from perspective, from distance, from the way a camera lens can compress space and make the plausible feel absurd. But that does not lessen the emotional effect. The mind sees what it sees: a roadway rearing upward over open water, a crest that hides what comes next, a horizon interrupted by uncertainty. The bridge was built not to astonish, but to solve a practical problem. Ships needed room to pass beneath it. The land on either side offered no helpful elevation, so the road had to climb. Necessity shaped the form, and form, in turn, created an image that unsettled anyone meeting it for the first time. Drivers approach with a touch of hesitation, sometimes easing off the accelerator as if caution alone might steady the earth. For a moment, logic and feeling part ways. One says the structure is sound. The other whispers that something about this cannot be right. Perhaps that is the first lesson these bridges offer. Human beings do not cross the world by reason alone. We cross it with nerves, with instinct, with imaginations that often outrun the facts. And sometimes the hardest distance to bridge is not the one over water, but the one between what we know and what we fear. How does a bridge survive when it is built to disappear? High in the Peruvian Andes, above the restless flow of the Apurimac River, a narrow crossing hangs between stone edges like a memory made visible. It is not forged from steel or poured in concrete. It is woven. Grass twisted into cords, cords braided into ropes, ropes drawn tight across a gorge that would otherwise divide the mountains into separate worlds. The Kuswachaka Bridge looks fragile to modern eyes, as if a strong wind or a single doubt might undo it. And yet its true strength lies in something far older than material. Each year the bridge is remade. Families from nearby communities gather with practiced hands and inherited knowledge. The old ropes are cut away. Fresh grass is harvested, twisted, braided, and bound together with a rhythm learned across generations. What rises over those 3 days is not simply a structure, but a ceremony of continuity. The bridge does not endure because it resists time. It endures because people refuse to let time sever what they remember how to build. There is something profound in that choice. Modern engineering often aims for permanence, for a span that will outlast those who designed it. But here, survival depends on renewal. The bridge lives because it is allowed to age, to fall, and to return. Its lifespan is not a flaw in the design, it is part of the design, a yearly acknowledgement that connection is not a one-time achievement. It is work, repeated work, shared work. Suspended above the canyon, Kuswachaka carries more than footsteps. It carries a philosophy. That knowledge can remain alive without books. That skill can move through a community the way water moves through a valley, shaping everything quietly. That a bridge made from grass may reveal something steel cannot. That what holds us together is often less about permanence than participation. And maybe that is the deeper crossing here. Not only from one cliff to another, but from the modern belief that strength must be fixed, toward an older understanding that strength can also be renewed. What does it feel like to step onto a bridge that seems to have been fastened to the sky by a single thought? On Langkawi Island in Malaysia, the rainforest climbs toward the peak of Gunung Masinchang, and above that green expanse, the Langkawi Sky Bridge curves through open air like a line drawn by a careful hand. It does not march straight from one side to the other. It bends, it lingers. It seems less interested in defeating the landscape than in floating alongside it. From below, it appears almost improbable, a crescent of steel and glass suspended over the forest canopy with no visible support from the valley floor. The secret is a single pylon anchored high on the mountain. From that one vertical spine, cables descend and hold the entire bridge in tension. It is an elegant solution born from difficult terrain. The slopes below are too steep, too unstable, too resistant to accept ordinary foundations. So the bridge had to trust the mountaintop and the mathematics of balance. For visitors, that balance can feel emotional before it feels structural. The deck shifts slightly underfoot. Wind moves across the span. Through transparent panels, the jungle drops away in a sudden revelation of depth. Far beyond, the sea opens in layers of blue and silver. The view is expansive, but so is the sensation of exposure. Beauty and vulnerability arrive together. That may be why this bridge stays with people. It does not merely carry you over a gap. It changes your sense of scale. The forest below, the islands beyond, the smallness of the human body standing midair. Everything is quietly rearranged. What once seemed solid becomes distant. What once felt distant becomes intimately present. There is a kind of wisdom in that suspended curve. Faced with a mountain that would not allow a conventional answer, the designers did not force the landscape into obedience. They listened to its limits and shaped something lighter, more adaptive, almost humble in its daring. And perhaps that is another form of intelligence. Not conquering the world, but learning how to hang within it gracefully, even when there is nothing beneath you but depth and wind. What kind of bridge do people cross when fear is no longer an exception, but part of the routine? In the Hunza Valley of northern Pakistan, where the mountains seem to rise without mercy, and the wind moves through the passes with its own sharp intention, the Hussaini hanging bridge stretches across the water in a way that feels less engineered than improvised against necessity. Wooden planks lie unevenly over steel cables. Some boards are missing. The gaps between them open directly onto the glacial lake below. The side cables meant for balance sway with each movement, as if uncertainty itself had been built into the design. To an outsider, it looks almost unthinkable. The bridge appears too fragile, too exposed, too vulnerable to carry the weight of ordinary life. And yet ordinary life is exactly what passes over it. Villagers cross to reach markets, schools, clinics, and neighbors. They do not arrive as thrill seekers. They arrive because there is no simpler path. What appears to others as an ordeal is, for them, part of the geography of survival. That is what gives the bridge its gravity. Not only its height or instability, but its intimacy with daily need. Every step is a negotiation between caution and momentum. Every crossing asks for concentration. The body knows the risk. The body goes anyway. Nearby, the remains of an older bridge still hang in partial ruin, a quiet witness to failure in time. It is difficult not to read that image as a kind of warning, but perhaps it is also a reminder that in remote places, infrastructure is never abstract. It is personal. It is built by hands that may later depend on it. It wears out where people wear out. It survives because communities do. The Husseini Bridge is not beautiful in the polished way of modern landmarks. Its beauty is harsher, more human. It tells the truth about what connection sometimes costs when landscapes are unforgiving and resources are thin. And maybe that is why it lingers in the mind, because it reveals that courage is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the decision to keep crossing the same trembling distance again and again because life is waiting on the other side. What happens when a bridge is built, not because the world is stable, but because the world is changing? In the Swiss Alps, where ice once offered its own rough passage through the mountains, the Trift Bridge, it threading across a widening void above glacial water, the color of clouded turquoise. The scene feels almost unreal. Rock, ice, meltwater, and sky arranged in severe silence. Yet this crossing exists because the silence has been disturbed. The glacier below retreated, and with it vanished the old route hikers once used to reach the mountain hut beyond. The bridge was not built over an ancient obstacle. It was built over a new absence. That absence matters. The first version of the Trift Bridge was notorious for its movement. In strong wind, it swayed so violently that some visitors could not remain standing. A crossing meant to restore access became, for many, an encounter with raw exposure. People crawled, others turned back. The bridge did what all suspension bridges do to some degree. It responded to the forces around it. But here, high above a cold lake born from melt, that responsiveness felt less like elegance and more like vulnerability made visible. Later, the structure was reinforced, steadied, widened. Engineering answered instability with refinement. And still, the bridge moves. Not dangerously, but enough to remind anyone crossing that this is not a road laid over certainty. It is a line suspended in an environment still in motion. Perhaps that is what gives Trift its peculiar emotional force. It is not simply a bridge in a beautiful place. It is a bridge in a place being transformed. The glacier that once defined this valley is shrinking. The lake below grows larger. The terrain itself is rewriting the terms of human passage. So the bridge becomes more than infrastructure. It becomes a marker of adaptation, a response to loss, a practical gesture inside a larger and more unsettled story. And standing there above the cold water in the memory of ice, one cannot help but wonder, when the Earth changes faster than our expectations, is engineering only a way across or also a way of admitting that the world we knew is already gone? How long can wonder and unease occupy the same piece of ground? In Colorado, where the Arkansas River cuts a dark path through the Royal Gorge, a bridge of timber and steel hangs high above the canyon like something preserved from another age of ambition. The Royal Gorge Bridge was never meant to solve a transportation crisis. It was built to invite people into an experience, to let them step out over emptiness and feel in their own bodies the strange intimacy between spectacle and fear. Even now, decades after it first opened, that invitation remains difficult to refuse and difficult to accept. The deck is made of wooden planks, and that detail changes everything. Wood speaks, it creaks, shifts, and answers the wind with sound. Underfoot, the bridge does not feel abstract or distant from the materials that hold it together. It feels immediate, alive almost. The canyon below drops away with a kind of quiet that seems to deepen the higher you stand above it. The river becomes a silver thread. The granite walls hold light and shadow like old memory. There is a particular tension here between confidence and humility. The bridge has endured weather, age, and fire. It has been restored, reinforced, and cared for across generations. By every practical measure, it is reliable. But reliability does not erase sensation. Step far enough toward the middle, and the body begins its own conversation with height. The planks flex slightly, the wind brushes the cables. Distance turns physical. What makes the Royal Gorge Bridge endure in the imagination is not simply that it was once the highest of its kind. Records fade, taller structures arrive. What remains is the human scale of the experience. A person, a narrow deck, a canyon vast enough to make certainty feel small. And perhaps that is why people keep coming. Not only to test nerve, but to remember something easy to lose in ordinary life. That awe is not always gentle, And that beauty sometimes asks us to stand where we can feel our own fragility without looking away. What changes inside us when the ground beneath our feet becomes transparent? In China's Zhangjiajie Grand Canyon, a bridge of glass stretches across the air with such clarity that it seems to erase itself. The structure is real, immense, carefully engineered. Yet the first sensation it creates is disbelief. People step forward, look down, and discover not a floor, but depth. A canyon opens beneath them in a sudden vertical rush of stone, shadow, and distance. The body reacts before the mind can intervene. This is what makes the Zhangjiajie Glass Bridge so remarkable. It is not only a feat of design, but an encounter with perception itself. The materials are strong, layered, tested, and secure. The panels can bear far more weight than any single visitor brings to them. Still, reassurance has limits. Human instinct is older than tempered glass. For millions of years, survival meant trusting surfaces that looked solid and fearing those that did not. Here, that ancient instinct meets modern engineering and refuses to surrender easily. Some visitors walk steadily across, though even they tend to shorten their stride. Others freeze, laugh nervously, crouch, or turn back. On certain faces, you can see a private negotiation unfolding between reason and alarm. The bridge becomes less a path than a mirror, revealing how thin the line can be between control and vulnerability. And yet there is beauty in that tension. The transparent floor does not simply expose the canyon below. It exposes the mind's need for certainty. It reminds us that safety is not always something we feel, even when it is something we possess. The experience is unsettling, but also clarifying. It asks whether trust is only belief in facts, or whether it also requires us to retrain the imagination. Perhaps that is why this bridge feels so modern. It reflects a world in which our tools grow more precise, while our inner fears remain beautifully ancient. We learn how to build farther, higher, lighter. But when the earth disappears beneath us, we are still creatures of instinct, trying to persuade ourselves that the invisible can hold. What does it mean to drive so high above the world that weather becomes part of the road? In southern France, the Millau Viaduct rises over the Tarn Valley with such poise that it can seem less like a bridge than a thought made visible. On clear days, it is an elegant line of pale deck and slender pylons carried across open space. But on certain mornings, when fog fills the valley below, the experience changes completely. The earth vanishes. The supports disappear into white. For a few suspended moments, the roadway seems to float above the clouds, as if the landscape itself has stepped aside. The bridge was designed to solve a practical problem, easing one of the most congested routes between northern and southern France. Yet the solution demanded more than scale. It required a structure capable of living with wind. The valley funnels air with startling force, turning invisible currents into one of the project's greatest challenges. So the bridge had to become aerodynamic, not merely strong. Its profile, its cables, its deck, all were shaped by the need to remain calm inside an atmosphere that often refuses calm. There is also a quieter intelligence in its form. The roadway carries a gentle curve, not because the structure requires it, but because drivers do. At such height and length, a perfectly straight path could feel disorienting, almost unreal. The curve restores a sense of movement, of destination, of human proportion. It acknowledges that engineering must account not only for forces in steel and concrete, but also for forces in the mind. That may be the most fascinating thing about Millau. It is grand, but not arrogant. It does not crush the valley beneath it. It passes over with precision, leaving light and weather to keep their roles in the scene. The result feels almost paradoxical, a massive intervention that still seems delicate. And perhaps that is what the finest bridges reveal. That true mastery is not simply building against nature, but building with enough sensitivity that even at extraordinary height, the human being crossing it can still feel oriented, sheltered, and briefly at peace inside the sky. What kind of problem forces engineers to begin with a rocket? In China's Hubei province, the Sidu River cuts through the land with such depth and severity that the usual rules of bridge building begin to fail. The canyon walls rise steep and nearly vertical. The distance across is vast. The drop below is so extreme that the river itself seems reduced to a narrow stroke of color at the bottom of a world made mostly of air. When the Sidu River Bridge opened, it did more than connect 2 points on a map. It redefined what a road could dare to cross. The challenge was not only the height, though the height alone is astonishing. It was the difficulty of the first gesture. Before towers, cables, and deck could exist, someone had to find a way to carry a line across a void too deep for ordinary methods. No practical route from below, no easy access through the canyon. So the engineers turned to something that sounds almost symbolic. They launched a rocket carrying a pilot line from one side to the other. A small arc through open space became the beginning of a structure vast enough to hold traffic high above the river. There is something deeply human in that image. Faced with a chasm that resists conventional thinking, people do not always retreat. Sometimes they invent a new first step. Once completed, the bridge transformed movement through the region. What had once been a long, difficult passage through mountain roads became a brief crossing in the sky. Drivers pass over it in minutes, often without fully understanding the scale of what lies beneath them. But if they glance down, even briefly, the illusion of normality disappears. Depth returns, perspective sharpens. The bridge is revealed for what it truly is, not just infrastructure, but an act of extraordinary confidence suspended above emptiness. And perhaps that is the strange power of such places. They remind us that progress is rarely a straight line. Sometimes it begins with an absurd idea, a thin wire in flight, and the refusal to believe that the impossible distance must remain impossible forever. What does a road feel like when it is lifted so high above the earth that the landscape below begins to lose its ordinary scale? In the mountains of southwestern China, where deep gorges once separated neighboring communities as effectively as oceans, the Beipanjiang Bridge stretches across open space with an almost unsettling calm. Seen from a distance, it appears elegant, even restrained. A clean line suspended between steep slopes. But the numbers behind it are difficult to absorb. The river below lies more than half a kilometer beneath the deck, so far down that water becomes light before it becomes shape. The crossing does not merely span a valley. It occupies altitude itself. Before the bridge, travel between the two sides demanded long hours on winding mountain roads. Villages that sat relatively close in pure geography remain distant in lived experience. Distance, after all, is never measured only in kilometers. It is measured in time, fatigue, isolation, and in the opportunities that never quite reach the other side. The bridge changed that with astonishing simplicity. A journey once defined by curves, descent, and caution became a brief passage on a modern highway. Yet simplicity at the level of use concealed immense complexity in the making. The gorge's depth, unstable rock, and unpredictable winds transformed construction into a prolonged negotiation with exposure. Materials had to be brought in from above. Workers operated at heights that altered perception itself, attached by harnesses while air moved violently through the canyon. The bridge that now feels seamless to a driver was assembled in conditions that must have felt, at times, almost unreal. And perhaps that contrast is the point. The greatest engineering achievements often erase the memory of their own difficulty. They become smooth, quiet, ordinary in use. But beneath that calm surface remains a more profound story, that human beings looked at a divide this severe and refused to let geography have the final word. To cross the Beipanjiang Bridge is to move through a triumph so refined it almost hides itself. And maybe that is the final mystery of progress, that the more extraordinary the solution, the more natural it can appear once the fear has been built into silence. What do these bridges really connect besides two edges of land? By now, the pattern begins to reveal itself. The materials differ. The climates shift. One bridge rises from jungle air, another from alpine wind, another from canyon light so deep it seems to swallow sound. Yet beneath their surfaces, they share a common. Each began in a place where the world imposed a separation, and human beings decided that separation was not the end of the story. Some of these crossings were born from survival, some from trade, pilgrimage, or the stubborn practicality of everyday life. Others emerged from ambition, from technological confidence, from the desire to prove that height and distance could be mastered with enough patience and calculation. But none of them are merely records or landmarks. They are expressions of a recurring human instinct to answer obstacles with design and distance with imagination. That instinct is not always triumphant in a simple way. Every bridge carries a shadow alongside its achievement. There is fear in the first crossing, maintenance in the years that follow, weather, fatigue, quantity of failure and change. Even the most graceful span is still a bargain with uncertainty. Steel rusts, timber creaks, rope frays. Glass must earn trust from the human nervous system one step at a time. To build a bridge is not to defeat vulnerability. It is to organize vulnerability into something passable. Perhaps that is why bridges feel larger than their engineering. They resemble the invisible structures of human life itself. Memory bridging generations, language bridging solitude, trust bridging the space between what one person knows and what another feels. We live by crossings we cannot always see, held up by habits, agreements, and acts of care that are no less real for being intangible. So when we stand above a gorge or river and look along a narrow path suspended over emptiness, we may be seeing more than infrastructure. We may be seeing a portrait of our species at its most recognizable, fragile, inventive, anxious, hopeful, and forever trying to make a way toward one another across distances that once seemed final. What remains after the fear fades and the crossing becomes routine? Perhaps this is the quiet destiny of every extraordinary bridge. At first, it is an argument against impossibility. People speak of the danger, the height, the daring of those who conceived it. They arrive with cameras, hesitation, disbelief. They stop at the entrance and look out into space as if the span ahead were a challenge issued directly to their senses. But time does what time always does. The astonishing becomes familiar. The impossible becomes infrastructure. What once demanded courage begins slowly to resemble normal life. And yet normal life may be the greatest achievement of all. A bridge fulfills itself not in spectacle, but in repetition. In the commuter who no longer notices the drop. In the child who crosses to school. In the deliveries that arrive before dusk. In the grandmother who can reach family without a day-long detour through mountain roads. The true success of a bridge is not that it inspires awe from afar, but that it disappears into the pattern of living. It becomes so reliable that people give their attention back to the lives waiting beyond it. There is something moving in that transformation. We often celebrate the moment of invention, the bold idea, the risk taken against the landscape. But endurance has its own kind of poetry. To serve quietly, day after day, beneath weather and changing light, carrying human intention across a gap without demanding to be admired. This may be a deeper form of greatness than any record in a book. Still, perhaps the awe never vanishes entirely. It settles into the background, like the memory of a storm long after the sky has cleared. Somewhere within the ordinary use of these structures remains the fact that they did not have to exist. They are here because someone imagined connection where separation once seemed permanent. And that may be the most hopeful thing a bridge can teach us. Not that obstacles are illusions, but that with enough patience, skill, and shared purpose, even the most intimidating distances can become part of the road home. In the end, these bridges leave us with a question larger than engineering. Across continents in centuries, we have followed spans of grass, timber, steel, cable, concrete, and glass. We have stood above rivers that look like threads, forests that fade into mist, and valleys so deep they seem to belong to another scale of existence. We have seen crossings born from necessity, from ingenuity, from ritual, from modern ambition. And beneath all of them, one truth has quietly endured. Human beings do not accept separation easily. We are a species of distances. Distances between mountains and coastlines, between villages and cities, between past knowledge and future need, but also distances within ourselves, between fear and trust, caution and wonder, imagination and proof. A bridge addresses both kinds at once. It gives the body a way forward, and the mind a reason to believe that what looked unreachable may not be unreachable forever. That is why these structures stay with us, not simply because they are tall or old or improbable, though many are all three. They stay with us because they make visible a hope we often carry invisibly through our lives. That broken things can be joined, that silence can be crossed, that even where the world appears divided by rock, weather, or time, a path may still be made. Of course, every bridge is temporary in the longest view. Materials age, landscapes shift, Civilizations pass their knowledge onward or lose it. Nothing built by human hands escapes time completely. But perhaps that makes the gesture more meaningful, not less. We build anyway. We repair. We rebuild. We hand methods from one generation to the next. We keep choosing connection over surrender. And maybe that is the lasting image these bridges offer. Not roads in the sky, though some seem exactly that. Not monuments to conquest, but acts of relationship. A refusal to let the gorge, the river, the abyss, or the unknown have the final word. Between one side and another, we keep making meaning and calling it a way across.